The Philadelphia Phillies have made it to the World Series. On the show today, I will discuss all of the what ifs that this opens up, because you look at that Phillies roster, you see Zack Wheeler, you see JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, all these guys that were sort of linked to the Mets at certain points, and the Phillies went for it. They landed all these guys. It didn't make a lot of sense on paper, and yet it has net them something that the Mets haven't had since 2015. If they win a World Series, something the Mets haven't had since 1986. A lot to discuss on this unfortunate edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode of Locked On Mets is sponsored by SimpliSafe Home Security, with Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe. 24/7 monitoring agents capture evidence to accurately verify threat for faster police response. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb to learn more. Now, here we are, okay? The Philadelphia Phillies have made it to the World Series, which none of us would have predicted throughout this season. And I have about as much egg on my face as anybody, because when the Phillies blew a lead against the Mets back in May, I openly laughed at Philly fans and said, "Imagine being one of them, and what losers that franchise has right now." Just looking at how terrible they played defensively, and the bullpen was a mess. And I mean, look, I was dead wrong. Now, I was right prior to the season when I said this was the best puncher's chance team in baseball, and they've proven to be that in the playoffs. But I mean, that was my preseason take that I ended up souring on throughout the year. And then you see the life come back into them. And then I kind of went back to that notion that, hey, with Zack Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and having a team that still has Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber and JT Realmuto and all that star power, yeah, they make it to the dance and anything can happen. But it's insane that we've gotten to this point and that they did it in 5 games against the same team that beat the Mets. The exact same team that embarrassed the Mets at Citi Field for all 3 games, goes up against the Phillies and can't take a game in Philadelphia. That's what it came down to. They split in San Diego. They had the exact same scenario, essentially, that the Mets had in front of them. 3 home games against that exact same team. Now, granted, they got to face Mike Clevenger and eventually Sean Manaea, but the point still stays the same here, that this Phillies team is showing life in the playoffs that the Mets didn't show, that the Braves didn't show against that exact same Phillies team. And, later in the show today, we're going to get into some what-if scenarios, because I see them up and down this Phillies roster where I think about the history just since I started hosting this show even. And all the things that happened over the past couple of years and how they've almost come to a head entirely on this Phillies roster that has gone on this magical run. But I come back to this season, and the Mets beat the Phillies 14 out of 19 tries there. And the Braves handled them as well. Not quite as much. If I remember correctly, I think it was like 11-8 on the year. I think the Phillies were. Don't quote me on that. It might be a little bit closer. But I know for a fact the Braves did take the season series against the Phillies. And then they lost the series that mattered in the postseason. And I actually saw just now Chris Castellani of Barstool. He used to host Locked On Tigers for us, but has been with Barstool a couple of years now. But he had a take from, I think it was back in July, where they were, I guess, talking about who were sleeping giants in Major League Baseball. He said the Phillies, and the final kind of kicker to his take, which is genius now in retrospect, is he said, and again, this is back in July, that he could see a scenario where the Mets and Braves were so exhausted basically from beating up on each other all season that the Phillies could be the freshest team come October. That's what they've been. And I think there is something to be said about the pressure of expectations. And, as fans, you're looking at this offseason for the Mets and you want to see Steve Cohen spend a ton of money. And we'll kind of continue that in the final segment today. But with that money spent comes greater expectations and just more pressure. If the Mets go into next season with a $350 million payroll, they're going to be expected to win a World Series, and that's going to put extra strain on the players. Now they're professionals. They're going to be getting paid very well, and you would hope that the talent that they have could rise above all of that. But now we're seeing a Philly team that had no expectations come October. They were expected to make the playoffs, and once they did that, their season was a success. And then, they come into this series against the Cardinals, where the Cardinals were great at home, and they steal a game and they grab momentum, and they've been riding that momentum the whole time, and that's what happens in playoff baseball. You just need to take hold of momentum and have belief in each other as a team, and all of a sudden, here you are in the World Series. And obviously, I have gotten to a point where, assuming the Astros finish off the Yankees, I will be rooting for the Astros against the Phillies, like I think most Mets fans will. And I kind of hate seeing the Phillies in this spot because it's hard not to be jealous. At the same time, it's also hard not to respect that team and those individuals on that team and what they've grown to accomplish here. It's really impressive. And Bryce Harper in particular is having an amazing postseason run. Zack Wheeler has been great, and that's the one guy in particular that I know there's probably some Mets fans that I have sour grapes over, but I would hope it's only sour grapes towards the organization for not retaining him, because he is showing that not only has he been one of the best regular season pitchers in baseball over the last couple of years, but it's carried over into October, and he's just been fantastic for them, and that's really been another one of the main reasons why they're in this position right now, where they're 4 wins away from a championship. And it just shows you, again, the difference between the regular season and the postseason, because I think we saw over a full year, the Phillies were the third best team in this division, but that was the regular season. And now they put together the best season of anyone in this division. And look, you can't take it away from them now. They're the best team in the National League this year. That's just what happens. That is how baseball works. So in the next segment, though, what I want to do is probably a painful exercise for Mets fans, which is explore what's gone wrong in the last couple of years and how the Phillies kind of capitalize on some mistakes, in my opinion, by the Mets front offices of the last few years, particularly the last couple under the presidency of Jeff Wilpon and the GM-ship of Brody Van Wagenen. But before we get to that, the numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe Home Security to protect their homes. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because I use SimpliSafe in my own home. I spoke about this last week. I just moved into a new apartment and a new area. I don't really know my way around. I'd probably be a little bit more nervous about, going to bed at night, but I don't have to worry about that because I have SimpliSafe. And they protect you like they protect me with cutting-edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. With 24/7 professional monitoring, SimpliSafe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or fire responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. They blanket your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, with smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real, and even have hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month for free by visiting simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb, where you can learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. As I watch the Phillies in the playoffs right now, I'm looking at a roster with a lot of names that were familiar topics on this show. Now, Bryce Harper was a little bit pre-Locked On Mets. I launched right before the start of the season in 2019, and Harper signed late that offseason before I began. But as a fan, that was a name that I was obviously interested in. And it was frustrating because you knew with the Wilpons it just wasn't realistic. And that's one of the big what ifs to me is what if Steve Cohen was allowed to purchase this team 2 years sooner, because the Wilpons clearly didn't have the money to continue to operate. They try to hold on so that Jeff can go on a couple more runs at winning a World Series where he gutted the farm system, made terrible trades, horrible free agent signings, and ultimately the Mets got nowhere. And then, they finally relented and sold. If that sale happens 2 years sooner and Steve Cohen is operating the Mets in the 2019 offseason, you never know. Bryce Harper could be a Met. And what Harper has done this postseason, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next segment, is prove exactly why you want a superstar in October. I'll go through all the numbers actually in the next segment when I discuss a little bit more about Aaron Judge. But you saw it in the final clinching game. Phillies down 1. He gets in that bat in the 8th inning. He puts him ahead with a 2-run homer that sends him to the World Series. He's been doing that all postseason long. He's hitting over 400. He has been absolutely sensational. Now, that is a really big what if scenario. That's a what if about Steve Cohen buying the team 2 years sooner. Now let's get into the moves that could have been made differently by this franchise that were far more realistic than that. And the first one's Zack Wheeler, which anyone who's been listening to the show since 2019 knows this is my biggest gripe that I've probably ever had on this show. The biggest take that I hammered time and again. People think I talked about Mark Vientos a lot this year. Just imagine how much I was talking about Zack Wheeler in 2019, then leading into that offseason where I was saying, if you go back, I got the receipts. I wanted the Mets to trade Noah Syndergaard that season, extend Zack Wheeler, because I felt like Zack Wheeler was cementing himself as an ace-type pitcher, and I thought going into the future, you found the two. There was two guys of that crop, Generation K 2.0, the Harvey, DeGrom, Wheeler, Matz, Syndergaard, core, that proved to be long-term frontline starters, Zack Wheeler and Jacob DeGrom. You had them both. All you had to do was come to Wheeler with a reasonable contract. He wanted to come back to the Mets. And time and again, whether it was almost trading him in 2015, not letting him travel with the team on that run, all these times where the Wilpons spit in his face, and now here he is pitching a clinching game for the Phillies to go to the World Series where he went 6, allowed 2 in this postseason run. I mean, the guy has just been nails for them pretty much the whole way through. First start against the Cardinals, doesn't allow an earned run over 6 1/3. Against the Braves, 6 innings, allowed 3. Did lose that one, but I mean, it's a tough team to face. And then in this route to advance into the World Series in the NLCS, he has 7 scoreless where he gives up just 1 hit, gets the win in that one with 8 strikeouts, just 1 walk. And then today, 6 innings pitched, 2 earned runs, 1 home run allowed, 8 strikeouts, no walks, altogether for the postseason, a 1.78 ERA, a 0.51 WHIP for Zack Wheeler. He's been incredible. So that's one that obviously is frustrating to me. The other two are, again, longtime gripes on this show, particularly the JT Realmuto one. Multiple fronts there that you can look at. You can look at the 2019 offseason and say, why did the Mets think that they should be trading for Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz when they could have traded probably Jared Kelenic for JT Realmuto straight up at that time? And that would have solved a huge area of concern for the Mets, and he could have been a guy that locked up that would have solidified the catcher position. And this year, Realmuto had an amazing season, and his second half is a big reason why they were able to hold on to that spot in the playoffs. Then you got Kyle Schwarber, which is, again, dating back to that trade. They take on Cano's money. They have Cano on the books this year for $20.25 million, and they're, in between a rock and a hard place where they have to decide, do you just get rid of him coming off the steroid suspension before you even see him, or do you try him out there because the last time we saw Cano in 2020, he was actually a really good hitter. So the Mets lean into it. They said, all right, we're going to ride with Cano to be that first option at DH, and we can address it during the season. And they let Kyle Schwarber go to the Phillies. And what was Schwarber's contract? I know it was pretty reasonable. 4-year deals at 90. Not even 4 years, $79 million. And Schwarber goes out and he led the league in home runs, if I'm not mistaken, this season. And what was it, 40 some odd bombs here? 46 home runs in the regular season for Schwarber. And in the postseason, he doesn't have the best collective numbers overall. You look at the 200 batting average, but still 375 on base, 457 slugging, 832 OPS, and he hit 3 home runs in this series. These are guys that, again, you're not just saying like the Mets absolutely should have made these moves and the Phillies are only here. No, I'm not trying to rewrite all history. All I'm saying is these are specific mistakes the Mets made that have, in turn, benefited the Phillies. The Harper one is more pie in the sky than any, but letting Zack Wheeler walk, massive mistake. Even beyond the trading for Realmuto, he was a free agent. He was a free agent available to sign. Instead of going out and getting him, they went for option B and overpaid J.S. McCann. Imagine how different both of these teams are right now if McCann was a Philly and Realmuto was a Met. You let him linger, ends up signing back with the Phillies. And Schwarber this offseason, I mean, imagine how much different the year would have been for the Mets if they had a legitimate DH. But Phillies, were able to swoop these guys up. And the one thing I'll say is credit to Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies and the fact that, and look, I don't want to give Middleton credit as the owner because it doesn't seem like he's the best of guys either. Not that he is entirely Wilpon-esque, but certainly not great. He's still committed to payroll, though. And they went for it. They signed Harper. They signed Wheeler. They signed Realmuto. They signed Schwarber and Castellanos. And for all these middling teams out there, the Phillies have taught us something. It's worth it to go for it. And if you can get a talent like Kyle Schwarber at $79 million over 4 years, which is a reasonable contract, do it and figure out everything else later. Because that frontline talent, no matter what they look like, put together, because on paper, that team made no sense with Castellanos and Schwarber in the outfield. But here they are. They had enough guys. Castellanos had some big moments in the playoffs. Schwarber did. And then obviously Harper, the superstar, being the superstar. And now they got a chance here to go out. And they got to play, most likely, an Astros team that would have basically steamrolled their way all the way through here. Have they even lost a game? I don't even think they've lost a game, right? No, they haven't. Again, that's assuming they win Game 4, but it's going to be a tough road for them. Anything can happen, though. If they take one in Houston, go back to Philly, get an early lead, get that fan base riled up, you never know. They can carry that momentum all the way to a championship. But I got to stop talking Phillies. So we're going to do, after a quick word from our sponsors, is go a little bit into Aaron Judge and what has this postseason run taught us about having that type of a superstar player. So we'll get to that in just a minute. 13 years, $330 million worth every single penny. Bryce Harper is honestly on a reasonable contract at this point. And this postseason, 419 average, 444 on base, 907 slugging, an OPS over 1350. He has 5 home runs, 11 RBIs, 6 doubles, 10 runs scored. He's just been everything you could ask from a superstar. And it's carried them. And I know, as I now look towards Aaron Judge in that dream scenario, which maybe we will go into this week, I want to at least give them the respect, the Yankees, to wait until their season ends before I try to pry their players out from under them on this show. But, even though Judge has had a bad postseason run, it doesn't mean that he can't have a great one, where he can be that type of superstar, because Harper didn't have the best postseason runs at times with the Nationals. But that's what can happen. You look at even like guys in the past, like Alex Rodriguez, doesn't have the reputation of always being that postseason performer. Then you look at like the 2009 season when they won the World Series, and he was the best player on the planet, like he was throughout a good portion of his career. So, needless to say, collect as many of these guys as you can. Now, the issue is they're expensive, and how many can you have on one roster? You can say, well, the Mets already did go out and they sign Lindor, and at some point they want to extend Alonso, and how do you pay for all these guys? So that's Steve Cohen's problem here. There's a guy that's available potentially this offseason. Now, if I'm the Yankees, the second the season ends, I'm calling Aaron Judge's agent. I'm apologizing profusely for not signing to an extension preseason. I'm asking them what number they want, and I'm writing that check, and Judge would stay a Yankee. But if that doesn't happen, and Judge actually does hit an open market where the top offer can get him, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that would improve your team more next season without having to give up the farm in a trade than Aaron Judge. And again, I'll do an entire podcast on this, exploring what the cost would be, his fit, all of these things. But to me, if the Mets went out this offseason and they were to retain Edwin Diaz, retain Jacob deGrom, and sign Aaron Judge, which would be an insane amount of money. I get that, okay? You can yell at me in the comments if you want to on YouTube, but trust me, I understand that that's a ridiculous amount of money that Cohen had to shell out. But I'm just throwing out the Steve Cohen watches the Phillies win a World Series and gets pissed off and decides to throw his wallet on the table and say, I'm winning this thing in 2023 if my life depends on it. That type of urgency. This is in some ways playing out perfectly for the scorched earth offseason from Steve Cohen that he's fully capable of. And I hate to ask the guy to spend a ridiculous amount of money on luxury tax, but then again, look at the Golden State Warriors in the NBA. It's working out for them pretty well. If you were to get that one guy to be the superstar talent that you need, and you basically take your roster, for the most part, run it back with Judge instead of a Brandon Nimmo. Look, we love Brandon Nimmo. 5 F4 this year. Judge's F4 was over 11. So, I'm not saying Judge has to be the guy. Juan Soto was available at the trade deadline. He went to the Padres. Didn't work out for them, really, but I'm sure it will work out in the future. Manny Machado was available at one point. The Padres had him. He did have the Bryce Harper-esque postseason run to help get them to the NLCS, but Harper was just better. These type of singular talents are what you want, what you need. So the question is, when do the Mets get their next one? I think Lindor is a great player. He's just a tier below the type of player I'm talking about. And I'm saying like Lindor is probably a top 25 player, and I'm talking about a top 5, top 10 player. But it's interesting. It's interesting to try to map out because Steve Cohen wants to land that guy. It's the question, who is it going to be? But in the meantime, as Mets fans, we have to simply sit back and watch a World Series that includes the Phillies and wait till the offseason where we can continue to have all of these conversations and try to forget what was ultimately a lost year in 2022. That's going to be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to check out everything going on in Major League. But you know what? Definitely listen to Locked On MLB. Make that your third listen. Go torture yourself. Listen to Locked On Phillies. See what Connor Thomas has to say. Anyway, that's going to be all for the show today. Tomorrow, we will be discussing who was the most valuable pitcher on the Mets in 2022. We'll do most valuable hitter on the following show. And then we'll probably close out the week with some minor league stuff. Minor league awards I'm planning on doing on Friday. So we'll figure out Thursday's show. But that is all. Check back in tomorrow for more Locked On Mets content.